Good evening, classmates. In this subject, Literature 7, Literary Criticism, I am assigned to discuss the period and movements in literature, specifically the Enlightenment period, and sample literary pieces. Before we delve deeper in my topic, let me discuss first the learning objectives. At the end of these recorded video PowerPoint presentations, the student should be able to, first, determine and discover things about the Age of Enlightenment. Second, make connection between the presented literary pieces during Enlightenment age and any or all the following: the personal life, aspect of human nature, society, and a wider world, and history. And the third one, reflect on the importance of studying any kind of literary pieces during Enlightenment age, like the novel Robinson Crusoe of 1719 and Swift's Gulliver Travels of 1726, and find values one can apply in real life as a future educator. As a warm-up, what comes to your mind when you consider this word, enlightenment? You may take your time thinking about this, but for my introduction, enlightenment. This is the age of enlightenment, also referred to as enlightenment or the age of reason. This was the time that represented the shift of thinking as intellectual. In late 17th and 18th century, Europe began emphasizing the importance of reason and individualism rather than a sole reliance on tradition and faith. Its purpose was to reform society using reason, to challenge ideas grounded in tradition and faith, and to advance knowledge throughout the scientific method. Enlightenment tinkered as opposed to superstition and intolerance. The ideas of Enlightenment spread and had significant influence on the culture, politics, government as America was colonized. What do you see and first notice about this image? What symbol can you identify and what might their meaning be? Or in what ways does this image connect to the Enlightenment? Can you identify any similarities between this art and drawings you created before? And if you were going to give this art a title, what would it be and why? There is an accompanying quote for this art. If there is something you know, communicate it. If there is something you don't know, search for it. So for your information, the art presented here in my presentation is an engraving that was found in the 1772 Encyclopedia, publication created by Enlightenment thinkers Dennis Diderot with the aim of changing the way people think. The format interpretation of this piece is the truth is represented in the figure at the top center and is surrounded by light and unveiled by the figure to the right, philosophy and reason. Now let's talk about the scientific revolution. In the 17th century, the scientific revolution had provided a new model for solving problems through rational thought and experimentation, secular, rather than the other authority of religion, what we call theological. I have here the two scientists rather. First is French philosopher. He is René Descartes, a mathematician and scientist who saw man's ability to reason as the very proof of his existence. He said, "I think, therefore I am," included in his Discourse on Method, published in 1637. Descartes rejected all forms of intellectual authority except the conclusion of his own thought, which he then used to prove the existence of God. And next is Sir Isaac Newton, the greatest English mathematician of his generation. He laid the foundation of differential and integral calculus. His work also optics and gravitation make him one of the greatest scientists the world has known. Along the Enlightenment period, the revolution culminated in the 17th century with the publication of Sir Isaac Newton's Principia in 1687, in which truly mechanical universe was explained through universal law of motion. Newton, like Descartes, presented a vision of the universe whose most basic workings would be calculated and understood rationally, but which was also a work of a creator. And then let's move with the countries who very known in the Enlightenment age. First is England, Hobbes and Locke. Two English intellectuals, mathematician Thomas Hobbes and philosopher John Locke, were among the first to use the scientific approach to study man and his society. This is Thomas Hobbes of 1588 to 1679. He is a mathematician. Hobbes' political theory was an effort to make politics into exact science like geometry. Hobbes was an admirer of Galileo Galilei idea concerning the nature of the physical world and his ideas of motion. Hobbes attempted to apply Galileo's scientific principle to social theory, reasoning that only matters exist and that human behavior could be predicted by exact scientific laws. Also, Hobbes had also been influenced by the English Civil War in 1642 to 1649 when the King Charles I was executed, which he believed was evidence that men were ultimately selfish and competitive. Hobbes wrote the Leviathan in 1651. Leviathan attempted to turn politics into science, arguing that men could be predicted with mathematical accuracy and thus regulated. According to the writing of Hobbes, men were motivated primarily by the desire for power and by fear of other men, and thus needed an all-powerful sovereign to rule over them. Next is John Locke of 1632 to 1704. A generation later, the philosopher John Locke developed an entirely different notion of the basic nature of humankind, which he saw as innately good. Locke was a friend of Sir Isaac Newton and was influenced by Newton's description of the universe as a vast machine operating by precise and varying scientific laws. He who also witnessed almost bloodless the glorious revolution in England became convinced the people who lived amicably together after discovering God's law through the application of reason. He also had two treatises of government on the 1690. He outlined the theory of politics based on the people's natural right, the right to life, liberty, and the ownership of property. In the early 18th century, many French thinkers, known as the Fellows, had come to admire England due to its advanced and economics and unique form of representative government. Many Fellows built upon the ideas and analytical method employed by Locke and attempted to develop theories of government based on a rational approach to man's relationship with the society in which he lived. The first Fellows of France is Charles II, the Baron de Montesquieu of 1689 to 1755. In the first generation of the French Fellows, one of the most important contributions to Enlightenment political thought was made by Montesquieu. Montesquieu came with respect to British political system of limited constitutional monarchy after a stay in England from 1729 to 1731. He also was influenced by Locke's two treatises of civil government of 1690, in which Locke articulated his support to government, which was created by the Revolution, and Montesquieu's masterwork, The Spirit of the Law, published on 1748. He developed a notion that human, natural, and divine law guide all things, including forms of government, and can best be discovered by empirical investigation. The next one is Voltaire of 1694 to 1778. Voltaire was famous in his younger age for his poetry and plays. But after personal troubles forced him into exile in England in 1726, he came into contact with the ideas of Locke and Newton and took up their concern. In 1749, Frederick the Great of Russia, who admired Voltaire's political view, invited him to come to his courts in Potsdam as his royal writing teacher. After 3 years of what Voltaire saw as intellectual trinity by the monarch, however, he fled to freer circumstances, settling for some time in Switzerland and eventually returning to Paris, to a hero's welcome and in the end of his life in 1778. And then the third one is Rousseau, and of 1712 to 1778. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, born a generation later, continued the philosophy tradition. He was an outspoken critic of the French social-political order. In his landmark work, The Social Contract, written in 1762, Rousseau rejected existing forms of government in favor of a community based on the choice of all its citizens and their democratic participation in every major decision. This idea were to be of central importance after the outbreak of French revolutions. Now I will discuss how Enlightenment spreads. First, the Enlightenment was a cosmopolitan movement not restricted to England and France. In Germany, Italy, and Spain, thinkers similar to the French fellows pursued their campaign against outmoded ideas and political, religious obscurantism. In colonial America, men like Benjamin Franklin of 1706 to 1790 corresponds with the European thinkers on political and scientific topics. Through Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, to name only the most prominent and critical rationalist thought of 18th century Europe, exercised a decisive influence on American political and social theories. The Declaration of Independence in 1776 is one of the clearest and most succinct articles of the Enlightenment program to be penned in the entire 19th century. Now, let's move with the sample literary pieces on Enlightenment period. First is the two main contributions of the English literature of the Enlightenment were Daniel Defoe and Jonathan Swift. Defoe's Robinson Crusoe of 1790 and Swift's Gulliver Travel 1726 are both proponent examples of how the writers in the era Enlightenment, to be specific, endeavor to enlighten people. Robinson Crusoe, in the full title, The Life and Strange Surprising Adventure of Robinson Crusoe of York, mariner who lived 8 and 20 years all alone in an uninhabited island on the coast of America near the mouth of the great river of Orinoco. Having been cast on shore by shipwreck, wherein all men perished by himself, with an account how he was the last as a stranger delivered by pirates, written by himself. What a long title. But for now, we already know it as Robinson Crusoe, a novel by Daniel Defoe, first publication in London in 1719. Robinson Crusoe is the Defoe's first long work of fiction. It introduced two of the most enduring characters in English literature, Robinson Crusoe and Friday. As we all know, progress is one of the main themes in the novel Robinson Crusoe. I want this thing shared to you because we as a future educator, it is much related to us, and then share it with our future students. Okay, Crusoe make progress in more than just physical ways, but also in mentality. During Crusoe time in the island, Crusoe became independent. He learned to live and survive on his own. It's easy to see the progression from when Crusoe first got stranded in the island to when he was rescued. It goes from pure survival mode in living comfortably by hunting and farming. He also created tools and furniture which helped him progress in his style of living. The most notable progression is mental. Before coming in the island, Crusoe was a goal-driven man that wanted to make money and travel the sea. He also had quarrels in God in his younger days. Through the novel, he had learned to be happy with where he was and what he had. He had started to focus on what he wanted, but being thankful for good things that happened to him. As he already exactly stated, I learned to look upon the bright side of my condition and less upon the dark side, and to consider what I enjoy rather than what I wanted. We can also see this on page 129. He had also progressed in his relationship with God and gave into the fact that this is God's world and he was just living in it. As he directly says in the novel, I survived with the word of God and by his assistance of his grace. We can see it in the book, page 128. That's for me. And then the next one is Gulliver's Travel. The original title of this is Travels into Several Remote Nations of the World. Fourth part, satirical work by Anglo-Irish author Jonathan Swift. It is published anonymously in the year 1726 as Travel into Several Remote Nations of the World. That, as we all know today as Gulliver Travel. It was intended to be a satire of the nature of man and what happens when man's pride grows too big for himself, and it plays a situation where he learns life. Although others around him miniature by his grandeur, they may still be his equal. This is demonstrated when Gulliver wakes up and finds himself captivated by a community of people less than 6 inches. Okay, I have here some documents and literature and literary pieces to know. First is Leviathan of 1651 by Thomas Hope. Second, two treatises of government of 1689 by John Locke. Third, The Spirit of Laws of 1748 by Montesquieu. The Social Contract 1762 of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Declaration of Independence of 1776 by Thomas Jefferson. The Candide 1759 by Voltaire, Utopia by Thomas More, Micrographia by Robert Hooke, A Vindication of Right of Human by Mary Wollstonecraft, The 120 Days of Sodom, written in 1785 but published in 1905 by Marquis de Sade, The Fragments of Freedom on the Press of 1776 by Nicolas de Cordian, and The Primary Discourse to the Encyclopedia by Jean-Leroy Alembert. So let's have my conclusion. The Enlightenment, sometimes referred to as the Age of Reason, was the confluence of ideas and activities that took place throughout the 18th century in Western Europe, England, and the American colonies. Scientific rationalism, exclamated by scientific method, was a hallmark of everything related to the Enlightenment. Following close in the heels of the Renaissance, Enlightenment thinkers believed that the advances of science and industry heralded a new age of egalitarianism and progress of humankind. I want to add that Enlightenment was at the center a celebration of ideas. Ideas about what the human mind was capable of and what could be achieved through deliberate action in scientific methodology. So I may conclude that the Renaissance was a seed while the Enlightenment was the blossom. And that's all from me. I provided here references where I cited this information I share with you tonight. If you have time, you can visit it for more information. Before this video ends, I'm Esperanza Jessica A, your discussant for tonight. And if you have any question or clarification with this topic, I provided here where you can contact me. Thank you and God bless everyone. Keep safe. Bye!